action at Los Negros was light, and the remainder of the 1st Cavalry Division came ashore. Thousands of rounds of machine gun, mortar, and artillery fire had stripped the foliage and toppled the trees. Troops were able to move inland with greater speed. Enemy resistance increased as the campaign progressed. Still, the Admiralties were secured by early April 1944. This victory completed the isolation of Rabaul and immobilized more than 100,000 enemy troops for the duration of the war. While the jungle fighting continued, another kind of war was being fought far to the north in the fog-shrouded Aleutians. In the spring and summer of 1943, the Japanese-held islands of Kiska and Attu were retaken after heavy bombing. 20 days of fighting in barren hills was necessary before the Army's 7th Division wrested Attu from the enemy. The Japanese secretly evacuated Kiska before Allied troops landed. Abandoned enemy supplies gave Americans a surprising change from their own combat rations. In November 1943, Admiral Nimitz forces in the Central Pacific moved into the Gilberts against the islands of Macon and Tarawa. Stepping stones to the huge enemy naval base of Truk, these small coral atolls would provide valuable lessons for future amphibious operations. Of taking Betio on Tarawa was given to the 2nd Marine Division. In 4 days of bloody fighting, these men earned 3,000 Purple Hearts. On Macon, the Japanese garrison was smaller and not as well entrenched. A regimental combat team of the Army's 27th Infantry Division established a beachhead on November 21st, 1943, and snuffed out the last enemy resistance 2 days later. Next to fall were the Marshall Islands, which had been held by the enemy since the end of World War I. In January 1944, the United States Army's 7th Division, veterans of the Aleutians, were assigned the biggest and toughest objective of all, Kwajalein. Experience gained from earlier landings, combined with improved support from air and naval forces, enabled the division to crush the enemy within 8 days. When Admiral Nimitz and his staff arrived to inspect the island, they found that lessons learned at Tarawa had paid off. Enemy losses had been severe, our own relatively light. Meanwhile, MacArthur was preparing for amphibious landings on the Japanese flanks at Hollandia and Itapi to provide new advanced bases for the drive on the Philippines. Low-level bomb runs by B-25s once again proved their worth. airfields at Hollandia were among our objectives. To take them, MacArthur would use the 41st Division, one of the toughest jungle outfits under his command. With them would fight a new division, the 24th.
You're better physically, you're better mentally, you have better weapons, you're going to have better support. So that you're going to be able to lick him hands down when it comes to individual fighting. However, do not take him too lightly.
The men were certain not to take him lightly. Briefings covered tactical aspects of the operations, including the treatment of prisoners.
Now, when we get them, maybe that they will have gone for a long time without water, perhaps without food. All right, give them a drink of water if you like. Give them something to eat if you like. But don't give them cigarettes. Don't give them gum. Don't give them candy, if you have any. Treat them according to the rules of war, no less and no more.
American forces again fought through steaming jungle to cut off 60,000 enemy soldiers to the east. For these captured enemy soldiers, the war was over. Their dreams of conquest and empire shattered. The much-needed airfields around Hollandia were the big prizes. Americans held at Itapy against a relentless enemy. Northwest along the coast to Lac di Sami. They cleaned out the enemy from the caves and ridges of Biak. Secured Little Noonfor Island and moved on to the tip of New Guinea. Not only the enemy waged war, American troops were set upon by leeches, centipedes, fire ants, and mosquitoes. In a climate where clothing mildewed, leather rotted, and bayonets rusted in the bay, they fought on and won. Hope rose steadily through the spring and summer of 1944. Not all the men would see the end, but at last that end seemed in sight. With the addition of new airfields, our planes were able to strike more often at the critical supply lines which supported far-flung enemy defenses. In rear areas, supply agencies gathered equipment and loaded vehicles and troops aboard ships to support Allied operations throughout the Pacific Theater. the summer of 1944, General MacArthur's forces were ready to move on toward the Philippines, while Admiral Nimitz prepared for the early invasion of the Marianas. The inevitable triumph over Japan was still a year in the future, but the way was clearly marked.
With the capture of the Marshall Islands by the combined American forces under Admiral Nimitz and the success of General MacArthur's operations in the Southwest Pacific, the next step in the Allied plan was the invasion of the Marianas. 6 months ahead of schedule, Saipan in the Marianas became the target of 2 Marine divisions on June 15, 1944. 5 days later, the Army's 27th Infantry Division went in to reinforce the beachhead. Enemy soldiers, refusing to surrender, holed up on hills and in caves. Many had to be blasted out. The surrender of enemy troops did not come easily. At times, Japanese prisoners were used to urge their comrades to surrender rather than be buried alive. The enemy had overrun early in the war, was pounded from the air and sea. The invasion of Guam took place on July 21, 1944. The enemy resisted the bold attacks of American soldiers and Marines for 19 days before the island again became a United States possession. During the fighting in the Marianas, Army engineers and Navy Seabees had begun work on an extensive system of B-29 airfields. In November of 1944, the first B-29s from Saipan flew against Japan. Between Guam and the Philippines were the Palau Islands. In September of 1944, the 1st Marine Division pushed ashore on Peleliu. The Army's 81st Division landed on nearby Angar Island. Navy, and Marine casualties amounted to nearly 12,000 men, while the Japanese garrisons were all but wiped out. On the same day that Nimitz forces invaded the Palaus, MacArthur's troops, in a strategically converging attack, jumped from the western tip of New Guinea to Morotai Island.
You want to put your videos on YouTube. You want to,